Did you see this video's thumbnail and wonder what the heck do canapés have to do with pop songs? Or maybe you asked yourself, what even is a canapé? The answers to these questions and more coming right up. Hey everybody, it's Elisabeth here. I've decided to start a YouTube series for people who love pop music as much as I do and for songwriters. Pop music is one of my favorite topics, and this gives me the chance to talk about it as much as I want to and to have a conversation with you about it. I've spent decades analyzing pop songs and trying to understand why some songs make it to the very top of the charts and other songs just don't hit the mark. And the question I always ask myself when I hear a hit pop song is, why does this song work? So that's exactly what I'm calling this series. Although I have dabbled in different styles of music in my life, pop music has always been my happy place. It just gives me joy and I can get super excited about it. Before we actually start diving into individual pop songs, I want to introduce my Canapé Principle in songwriting, because that's kind of always the lens I look through when I'm analyzing pop songs. Let's get started. Now, if you're not that much into cooking, you may be asking yourself, what even is a canapé? Well, if you've ever been to a cocktail party or a reception or a wedding, then you've probably eaten canapés. A canapé is a thin piece of bread, toast, pastry, a cracker, or a vegetable topped with some savory food intended to be eaten in one bite. The basic structure of a canapé is the firm, crunchy base, then a savory topping, that's a creative mixture of flavors and textures, and a garnish. Okay, but what's the connection to pop songs? I hear you ask. We're getting there. I've made a list of 7 things you should keep in mind when you're creating a canapé. And as we go through this list, I'm going to explain how this applies to creating pop songs. And this is what I call the Canapé Principle in songwriting. Canapés are finger food and are supposed to be eaten in one bite, maybe 2 bites. The point of them is not to be a meal, but rather small flavor bombs that are easy to eat and that pack a punch. And not only are they fun to eat, but because they're so small, you can pick and choose and just have a wide range of flavor experiences. Now, don't you agree that we could say exactly the same thing about pop songs? Think about it. Pop songs are basically the miniatures in today's music. Songs that are just over 2 minutes aren't uncommon these days. So pop songs are super compact and they have to pack a lot into those 2 to 3 minutes. That means that they have to get to the point quickly. They have to be easy to consume. They can't be messy. And that one bite, that one song has to be a perfect balance of flavors and textures. And what that exactly means in songs we'll be getting to in the next couple of points. Your canapé needs a base that's strong enough and stable enough to hold everything that you're going to be putting on top. So it's usually a piece of toast or a cracker or some crunchy pastry or a firm vegetable. The main point about the base is its structural integrity, its stability, its crunch. In songs, this means we need that one crunchy element that really gives the song stability, that holds the rest of the song. This is the element that comes to mind when you remember a song 10 years later or 20 years later. And if you're thinking that it's always the chorus, well, it isn't. If you think of Beat It, then probably the first thing that comes to mind is the guitar riff. Or if you think of Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys, then it's likely that the first thing you'll think of is that iconic theremin line. So to sum up, a pop song needs that one crunchy element. But that is the absolute minimum. Nowadays, pop songs have multiple crunchy elements, which we'll be getting to in the next point. Your canapé topping needs to be a perfect balance of textures. If you happen to love MasterChef Australia as much as I do, then you've probably seen that legendary canapé episode in season 10, and you'll probably remember the goat's cheese mousse canapé with beetroot and bush spices, or the river mint lamb and labneh canapé. Look at those super crunchy bases, and you can see that the toppings aren't just one texture, but a combination of creamy elements and elements with a bite or crunch. In the point before, we talked about the main crunchy element of a song. Now, in this point, we're talking about the other crunchy and creamy elements that a pop song needs. So let me just explain what I mean exactly when I use the words crunchy and creamy in the context of pop songs. So in the terminology of the Canapé Principle, a crunchy element is one that has a very clear architecture. It has a very memorable motivic structure. It has a strong rhythmic identity, all of which make it very catchy. A guitar riff can be crunchy. Think Titanium. Or a motivic accompanying pattern like the synth clave rhythm in Macarena. That is crunchy. A bass line can be crunchy. So coming back to this point, which is combine different crunchy and creamy textures, this means that a pop song should have at least one or two other crunchy elements in addition to that main crunchy hook. And to balance out those crunchy elements, we also need some creamy elements. Creamy elements just add a sense of warmth, and they kind of glue the crunchy elements together. These elements are less conspicuous because they're less rhythmic and less melodic. So they could be sustained keys, for example, or a very basic guitar strumming pattern. Just to give you an example, or maybe more of a comparison, last week I was listening to the Today's Hits playlist on Apple Music, and they had Ava Max and Tiesto's song The Motto, and directly after it, Light Switch by Charlie Puth. And when you hear these songs back to back, it's really like chalk and cheese. The Motto has 3 super crunchy elements going on in the chorus, and even though I love both songs, the elements in Light Switch are way less crunchy because they have less repetition, they're less motivic, the phrases are longer, and they have a weaker rhythmic identity. Go ahead and listen to them, and then you'll see what I mean. And I just want to round off this point by adding a caveat. The ratio of crunchy to creamy elements can vary. For example, depending on regional preferences, or there are differences between pop songs nowadays and pop songs 10, 20, 30 years ago, because nowadays they are way crunchier than they used to be ever since EDM started infiltrating mainstream pop. And also, obviously, ballads will be creamier than up-tempo songs. These are all things that we'll get into in more detail when we actually go and look at individual songs in the course of this series. Let's get to the next point. Imagine being at an event and you've taken a canapé off the tray and you take a bite and you discover that the base is salty, the topping is salty, and the garnish is salty. Then that just won't be a very pleasing bite. And the aim is to balance out flavors. And the key word here is balance. So what are the things that we need to balance out in a pop song? Well, this is actually a very big point, and it includes balance in the structure, in melody and harmony, a balance between repetition and variation, balance between tension and release, balance in the whole dynamic development or intensity in your song, and there's more. And this may seem like a lot right now, but we will see how other songwriters have successfully implemented these principles, and there's always something to learn. I can't stress enough how important this point is. So let's say that we've followed all the steps up to here and we've created a perfectly balanced canapé. Now this is the point that makes sure that the final product isn't generic or boring in the end. I really love this point because this is where you get to play around and see where you can just push the envelope just a bit to make it more unique and more special. So it could be a unique sound, or maybe you can see where the vocal melody could go in a completely different direction at some point than you would expect it to. Or you could consider bringing in just a bit of grit or some sort of imperfection in quotation marks. This is the balancing act between fulfilling audience expectations and kind of keeping our promise to the audience, but at the same time introducing something fresh, something unique, something unusual. It's also where we balance out the familiar and the unexpected. And this element of surprise just brings in freshness. Garnishes are the final touches, the elements you sprinkle over the top of your finished canapé. They are important because if you don't have them, then your canapé just kind of looks incomplete, or it doesn't have that professional touch to it. And the garnishes can add like a contrasting flavor or texture, or they can just add an element of fun, or just for the sake of visual impact. So they shouldn't be an afterthought, but they do need to be balanced and limited so that they don't overpower the actual canapé. And in pop songs, the garnishes could be production elements or vocal effects, for example. Just the things that kind of round off your final song and that just add that bit of sparkle in the end. And number 7, have fun and get creative. So guys, that was a basic outline of my Canapé Principle in songwriting. And now we want to dive right in and learn from the best. So go ahead and click on my next video. As we say here in Austria, Bussi Baba, and see you in a bit.